They've been lying to you about how wars actually start. You were told it's a madman, an assassination, a surprise attack, one dramatic moment, and suddenly the world is burning. That's the story they sell in textbooks and documentaries. It's clean, it's simple, and it's designed to keep you from seeing the real pattern. Because if you understood how wars actually begin, you'd realize we're already in one. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you that the 2026 financial crisis isn't approaching. It's here. It started 30 days ago. And based on every historical pattern, every mathematical indicator, every warning sign that appeared before World War I and World War II, this crisis has all the signatures of a trigger event for global military conflict. We're not standing on the edge anymore. We've already gone over. The story begins with a lie they taught you in school. The year was 1914. An Austrian archduke was shot in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. One bullet, and suddenly the world went to war. 20 million people dead, empires destroyed, that's what they tell you. Random violence, bad luck, the chaos of history. But that story is designed to hide the truth. Behind that assassination, a financial war had been raging for decades. The British Empire controlled the global financial system. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. London decided who could do business, who received credit, who accessed capital. If you wanted to trade anywhere on Earth, you went through London. But Britain was collapsing under the weight of maintaining colonies across a quarter of the planet. Their industrial dominance was being systematically crushed by a rising power with better technology, better factories, a younger population. Germany. Germany was the China of 1914. Superior manufacturing, better efficiency, more advanced industry. But they were locked out of the financial system, which was completely controlled by London and its allies. The British used finance as a weapon. They restricted credit to German businesses. They controlled gold supply. They used colonial monopolies to control raw materials that German factories desperately needed. They built a financial cage around Germany and locked every door. German leaders looked at their situation and did the math. They couldn't grow economically. They couldn't feed their people. They couldn't secure resources within the British-controlled system. Every peaceful path to prosperity was blocked. They faced a simple choice: accept permanent economic strangulation or break the system through military force. When the financial channels closed, when every peaceful option disappeared, the military option became inevitable. The assassination in Sarajevo didn't cause World War I. It was the excuse everyone had been waiting for to launch a war that economic desperation had already made unavoidable. And here's what they really don't want you to know. The bankers made it worse. Banks in London, Paris, and New York had loaned massive amounts to European governments in the decade before 1914. These loans created obligations that forced countries into war. French banks had loaned billions to Russia. If Russia lost, French banks went bankrupt. German banks were invested in Austria-Hungary. British banks controlled half the world's finances. When war started, these banks couldn't let their side lose. Losing meant their loans would never be repaid. They needed the war to continue. They funded it. They profited from it. The financial system created the conditions for war, then locked everyone into fighting it to the death. The lesson is crystal clear. When an established power uses financial weapons to strangle a rising power, the rising power eventually calculates that war is their only option for survival. They'd rather fight and maybe die than slowly suffocate. Now look at today, January 2026. Replace Britain with the United States. Replace Germany with China. Replace the gold standard with the dollar system. Replace colonial trade routes with semiconductor supply chains and rare earth minerals. Everything else is identical. The financial strangulation, the rising power being contained, the impossible debt crushing the established power, the formation of hostile alliance blocs, the military buildups, the names changed. We have nuclear weapons now instead of poison gas. But the game board is exactly the same, and we're 3 moves from checkmate. What's driving this isn't ideology. It's not freedom versus tyranny. It's math. Cold, brutal arithmetic that doesn't care about your politics. We are living in the largest debt bubble in human history, and it's not a bubble anymore. It's popping right now. Global debt crossed $320 trillion at the end of 2025. That's more than 340% of global GDP. The world collectively owes more than 3.5 times everything it produces in a year. In a normal cycle, debt gets cleared by recession. Bad businesses fail. Debts get written off. You take the pain, then rebuild. That's capitalism. But we're not in a normal cycle. We're in what economists call the sovereign debt super cycle. And we just hit the terminal phase. Governments are the biggest debtors, and governments don't go bankrupt like businesses do. The United States federal government officially owes $38 trillion as of this month, but that's just what they admit to. It doesn't include Social Security, Medicare, government pensions. Add those unfunded liabilities, and the real number exceeds $200 trillion. Japan's government debt is 270% of their GDP, the highest in peacetime history. Italy owes 145% of GDP. France is at 125%. Even Germany is pushing 75% and rising fast. Here's the trap. Governments can't go bankrupt like a company. When they can't pay, they have 3 choices, only 3. Choice 1 is austerity. Cut everything. Slash pensions, health care, raise taxes. This triggers riots and revolutions. No politician survives it. Look what happened in Greece. They tried austerity, and the country nearly burned down. That was 10 million people. Imagine trying it in America with 335 million people and 400 million guns. It won't happen. Choice 2 is default. Just refuse to pay. This crashes the entire global banking system overnight because every bank, every pension, every insurance company holds government bonds as safe assets. If governments default, every financial institution on earth goes bankrupt simultaneously. Trade stops, credit freezes. For the U.S., defaulting means losing reserve currency status. The dollar collapses. We can't import anything. The entire standard of living vanishes. That's not happening either. Which leaves choice 3, inflation and war. History proves this is always the choice. Always. Why? Because war justifies everything. War lets you print unlimited money. You're not destroying the currency, you're funding national defense. War lets government take total control. It's not tyranny, it's emergency powers. War justifies rationing, price controls, censorship, surveillance. All the tools you need to manage a financial collapse. And here's the key. War lets you erase debts owed to the enemy. The U.S. owes China $1.1 trillion in Treasury bonds. If we're at war with China, that debt gets frozen or canceled. We just erased over $1 trillion in obligations without technically defaulting. It's the ultimate reset button. This isn't theory. This is exactly what happened in World War I and World War II. Debts between enemies were erased. And right now, a massive wall of debt is maturing. It's not coming due later. It's due now. Trillions borrowed at 0% in 2020, and 2021 have to be refinanced at 5 to 6%. The math doesn't work. Companies and governments will default. The system is breaking right now. And when leaders face collapse with angry populations demanding answers, history shows they always find a foreign enemy to blame and attack. The conflict isn't theoretical anymore. It's not approaching. It's here. It's happening right now. It's just not being fought with bombs yet. It's being fought with bond sales, sanctions, tariffs, and the weaponization of money. Let me show you what happened in just the last 30 days. December 2025. China sold $15 billion in US Treasuries, dropping their holdings to $680 billion, the lowest since 2008. They're not slowly reducing, they're running for the exits. January 2026, first 3 weeks. Japan sold $8 billion. Saudi Arabia sold $4 billion. Europe reduced holdings. Foreign central banks are in full retreat from U.S. debt. They see what's coming. January 15, 2026. The 10-year Treasury yield hit 4.8%, the highest since 2007. And it's rising even though the Fed cut rates. The bond market is openly defying the Federal Reserve. The market is pricing in default risk and dollar collapse. January 18, 2026. Trump administration officials publicly discussed taking Greenland, not buying it, taking it through military pressure. Denmark, our NATO ally, deployed troops to Greenland and warned this would end our alliance. We're threatening military action against an ally over resources. That's not normal. That's desperation. January 20th, 2026. China and Russia announced a formal military alliance committing to mutual defense and joint operations. Two nuclear powers just formed an anti-U.S. alliance. This is the new axis. January 22nd, 2026. Gold hit $4,600 per ounce, up 25% in 3 months. Central banks are dumping paper and hoarding gold at rates not seen since 1939, right before World War II. These events didn't happen over years. They happened in the last 30 days. We're not sliding toward crisis. We're in free fall. For decades, the dollar was neutral. You didn't have to like America to use dollars. It was just the most efficient way to trade. But in the last 3 years, the U.S. government weaponized it. They turned it from a tool into a weapon. And it backfired catastrophically. February 2022. The U.S. froze $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves. Russia had saved that money for decades, held it in Western banks. Overnight, we made it disappear. You can argue it was justified, but you're missing the point. Every other country saw that and realized your money is only safe until we say it's not. If we don't like what you do, we delete your savings with a keystroke. This shattered trust. Every finance minister, every central banker in China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil realized that holding dollars is now a strategic vulnerability. It's not safety, it's a leash. This triggered a global panic to escape dollar dependence before they become the next target. And we're seeing the results explode right now. China built CIPS, an alternative to SWIFT. It now has 4,500 financial institutions in 115 countries processing $500 billion daily in non-dollar transactions. Russia built SPFS after being cut from SWIFT. It handles 35% of Russian payments and has 180 institutions in 25 countries. BRICS is launching BRICS Pay in Q2 2026, a system to settle trade without dollars. Saudi Arabia, our most important Middle East ally for 80 years, now accepts Chinese yuan for oil. The petrodollar is dead. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold in 2025, 3 years straight of record buying. They're building a sanction-proof system. They're preparing for war. But here's the danger. Financial sanctions are siege warfare. In history, a siege is an act of war. When you cut a nation off from money, you're cutting them off from food, medicine, technology, everything. You're backing them into a corner. And cornered nations with nothing to lose become extremely dangerous. Japan in 1941 is the perfect example. The U.S. embargoed their oil. Japan imported 80% of their oil from us. The embargo meant their economy would collapse in months and their military would be immobilized in a year. They did the math. They could accept national suicide through economic strangulation, or they could attack while they still had fuel in their tanks. They attacked Pearl Harbor not because they thought they'd win a long war. They attacked because we gave them no choice. Fight or die. Right now we're doing the exact same thing to China. Technology bans, financial restrictions, alliance encirclement. We're building the cage. And China is watching their options disappear every month. History says what happens next. They lash out while they still can. While the U.S. struggles with debt, China faces something worse, the simultaneous collapse of their economy and their population. The Chinese miracle was built on two things: a massive real estate bubble and export manufacturing. Both just died. China's property market, 70% of household wealth, imploded. Evergrande, Country Garden, dozens of developers defaulted on over $500 billion. Entire ghost cities sit empty. Housing prices down 30 to 40%. Chinese citizens watching their life savings evaporate. Meanwhile, China's population is collapsing faster than any nation in history. They lost over 2 million people in 2023. They'll lose 100 million by 2050. The working-age population is shrinking every year. This is a death spiral. Fewer workers, less growth, less tax revenue. Government can't keep promises. That leads to unrest. And here's the danger. The Communist Party's legitimacy comes from one thing only: economic growth. That's the deal. No freedom, no elections. But your life gets better every year. For 40 years it worked. But now it's breaking. Growth down to 3 to 4%. Probably fake numbers anyway. Youth unemployment over 20%. Probably over 30% in reality. The property wealth is gone. Exports are being killed by Western tariffs. The population is shrinking. The deal is broken. When growth stops, the party faces a legitimacy crisis that threatens its existence. Authoritarian regimes facing this have two options: liberalize and allow freedom to release pressure, or double down on nationalism and create an external enemy. Xi has shown zero interest in freedom. He's consolidated power and ramped up nationalist messaging about China's destiny and Western containment. Taking Taiwan becomes more than territorial ambition. It becomes political survival. It rallies a fractured nation. It seizes control of the world's semiconductor production. Over 90% of advanced chips are made in Taiwan. Whoever controls Taiwan controls AI weapons, the future. This is why U.S. military commanders have said 2025 to 2027 is the danger window, and we're in it now. Why now? Because there's a gap in U.S. readiness. Old systems are retiring. New ones aren't ready until 2027, 2028. Meanwhile, China's Navy is at peak strength. They're launching more tonnage than our entire Navy every 4 years. If you're a Chinese planner and you think war is inevitable, you strike in this window. You strike while you have advantage. And if China's economy collapses in 2026, the party may decide war is better than revolution at home. War gives control. War unifies. War lets you blame external enemies for internal failures. It's the same calculation governments have made forever when trapped. The 2026 crisis is fundamentally about real things, not paper. Finance is just a claim on physical resources: energy, food, metals, chips. When the financial system works, claims are honored. You give me dollars, I give you oil. But when trust breaks, when currencies collapse, paper claims become worthless. You can't eat a dollar. You can't fuel a tank with a bond. You can't defend a country with Bitcoin. And we're entering an era of real scarcity. Oil production peaked in 2018 and has been flat since. Yes, U.S. shale increased, but it depletes fast and costs $60 to $80 per barrel. The cheap oil is gone. Critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, copper. These are in shortage and concentrated in unstable regions. China controls 85% of rare earth processing. Congo controls 70% of cobalt. These are choke points, single points of failure. In a stable world, nations trade for resources. But what happens when the currency for trade collapses? When the dollar dies and China or Saudi Arabia won't accept it for oil, the U.S. can't just print money to buy oil if nobody wants the money. We either produce something valuable to trade or we take it by force. Historically, when trade breaks down, war replaces it. If China can't buy energy with yuan because nobody trusts it, or if the U.S. can't buy chips because supply chains are severed, market logic gets replaced by military logic. You take what you need, and we're watching this happen. The world is splitting into two hostile blocks: Western Bloc, U.S., EU, Japan, South Korea, Australia. The traditional alliance, Eastern Bloc, China, Russia, Iran, increasingly Saudi Arabia, parts of Africa, parts of Latin America. These blocs are decoupling. Separate supply chains, separate tech standards, separate internets, separate financial systems. This isn't competition. This is rival empires forming, and history is clear. When the world divides into armed empires, those empires go to war. The decoupling is preparation. It's building fortress walls before the siege. So why is 2026 the breaking point? Why this year? The answer is in the bond market, and it's mathematical. 2020-2021, central banks dropped rates to zero. Governments and corporations borrowed trillions at free money rates. U.S. corporations issued $2 trillion in bonds in 2020 alone. Governments borrowed $15 trillion globally. They locked in 5-year loans because why not when money is free? Now do the math. 2021 plus 5 years equals 2026. Right now, this year. In 2026, a massive wall of debt matures. It has to be refinanced, but not at 0%, at 5, 6%, or higher. Interest payments triple or quadruple overnight. This is the maturity wall. It's hitting now in Q1 and Q2 2026. Thousands of zombie companies that only survived on cheap debt will default. They can't afford 6% rates. Their business models don't work. They'll fail. This triggers a cascade. Companies default. Banks take losses. Enough banks take losses, the system becomes unstable. March 2023 was a preview. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature, First Republic. 3 banks failed in 2 weeks. That was a warning. In 2026, with the full wall hitting, the stress will be exponentially worse. When banks fail, central banks face the impossible choice. Let it collapse into depression, or print trillions to bail everyone out. History says they print, always. But printing trillions in 2026, in a fragmented world with rival blocs and foreign central banks dumping dollars, won't save the system. It'll accelerate currency collapse. The dollar will die in international markets as remaining holders stampede out. And when the reserve currency dies, the U.S. loses its ability to maintain power financially. We can't buy allies. We can't import with printed money. We have to use force to get what we need. The financial crisis becomes the trigger for military escalation. There's one more factor, the darkest one. Domestic politics in the U.S., Europe, China. The social fabric is tearing. In America, wealth inequality is worse than 1928, right before the Great Depression. The middle class is being destroyed by inflation and stagnant wages. Trust in government, media, institutions is at all-time lows. Political division is extreme. Half the country sees the other half as enemies, not fellow citizens. When the economy crashes in 2026, when unemployment spikes to 8, 10, 12%, when stocks fall, 40, 50%, when pensions get cut, when savings evaporate, the rage will be uncontrollable. People will demand blood. For the elite, for politicians, this is terrifying. How do you control an armed, furious population ready to burn it all down? You give them an external enemy. You redirect rage outward. War is the ultimate control tool. It silences dissent as treason. It lets government seize total emergency control, rationing, price controls, censorship, surveillance, all justified for national security. It happened in the 1930s. Depression created desperation. Leaders channeled it into nationalism and war. In 2026, leaders may calculate that foreign war is the only way to stay in power. Rally around the flag. Unity becomes mandatory. Dissent becomes treason. It's cynical and evil. But it's been done over and over. Let me game out the next 6 to 12 months. We are in late January 2026 now. The U.S. economy shows clear stagflation signs. Contraction plus inflation. The Fed is trapped, can't cut rates without accelerating inflation, can't raise without triggering recession. February, March 2026. Corporate debt wall hits hard. Major corporations file bankruptcy. Can't refinance at current rates, unemployment spikes. 200,000 weekly claims to 400,000 to 600,000. Consumer spending collapses. Retail sales crater, March-April 2026. Regional banks start failing. Commercial real estate loans and corporate loans default. FDIC steps in but doesn't have enough money for multiple large banks. Emergency bailout passes, but it's massively unpopular. People furious that banks get saved while they lose jobs. June-July 2026. Dollar collapses in international markets. Countries see the printing and run. Dollar loses 25% of value in 6 weeks. Oil hits $180 per barrel as OPEC Plus refuses dollars. Gas in the U.S. hits $9, then $12 a gallon. Inflation jumps to 25% annually. Government implements emergency price controls and rationing. Shortages appear. The consumer economy stops. July-August 2026. To secure resources, U.S. and allies move militarily. Naval operations in South China Sea intensify. Confrontations, warning shots. Then an incident, collision. Missile fired, aircraft shot down, the thing that turns gray zone into hot war. China responds with cyber attacks. Power grids go down, internet unreliable, banking compromised, cell networks fail. The digital infrastructure modern life depends on stops. ATMs don't work, cards don't process, payments fail, and in that chaos, only what you physically hold matters, not paper, not digital. What you can defend. This isn't science fiction. This is logical progression of current trends. Every step has historical precedent. We've seen it before. 1914, 1939. The pattern repeats because math and human nature don't change. So what do? The rules of money, property, safety will change. In war or crisis, paper assets become vulnerable. Stocks, bonds, cash, retirement accounts. These are digital claims on a system. If the system breaks, claims become worthless. They can be frozen by government order, inflated to nothing, taxed into oblivion. We've seen it. Germany 1923, cash worthless in hyperinflation. America 1933, gold confiscated. Europe 1940s, accounts frozen, currencies replaced, paper wealth vanished. Assets that survived are real, physical, gold you hold, not ETFs. Land that produces food, businesses making essentials, skills valuable regardless of currency. Community networks built on trust. The preparation is financial, mental, physical. Understanding that 80 years of peace since 1945 is the anomaly, not the norm. The peace is ending. The debt cycle is turning. This crisis is different. The system itself is breaking. Too much debt to save, too much inflation to contain, too many powers in conflict. Reduce dependence on the financial system. Eliminate debt. Accumulate tangible assets, supplies, skills, networks. You're not paranoid. You're reading signals that appear before every breakdown. 2026 is here. We're in it. The forces aren't approaching. They're active. $320 trillion in debt is real and breaking. U.S. to China confrontation is real and escalating daily. Historical patterns are real and repeating with precision. We're walking the path to 1914 and 1939. Central bankers built a debt tower. Politicians weaponized finance. Military planners are positioning. Economic desperation creates conditions for leaders to choose war over collapse. We can't stop the cycle. Empires rise, overextend, accumulate debt, face challengers, panic, fight. It's history's rhythm. But we can choose not to be blind victims. We can see warnings, prepare, protect what we built. Because when currencies collapse and empires fall, only wealth you can hold and defend survives. The 2026 financial crisis isn't coming, it's here. It started in January. Based on every pattern, this crisis triggers something far worse. The world since 1945 is ending. What replaces it is being decided now in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, Moscow. Watch the next 90 days. Watch bond markets, military movements, currency markets, gold prices. These indicators tell you everything. If this changed how you see the next few months, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next video covers preparation strategies, assets that survive collapse, the playbook for navigating transition. You need it. Stay alert. Stay prepared. Understand we're not watching previews. We're in the opening act of something that will define the next decade. The story isn't written yet, but the first chapters are printing now in January 2026. Don't be caught blind when the next chapter begins.